Welcome to White Flag.
Welcome, dear reader, to the White Flag world. So first, some basic admin stuff. Thanks to our Patreon subscribers for keeping us on the straight and narrow. Come on down to the Wide Flank Discord if you want to hang out and talk, make friends, game hard. And if you're a real freak, go ahead and rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you can. All right. How's it going, Alon?
Oh, I'm laughing already. Like some of those lines. I feel like you're the type of person who can't not joke around. I'm sort of similar, more in IRL than on the pod, but
yeah,
it's just like game hard, like
game hard, like, brother.
Yeah, but I'm doing good, dude. I'm excited about the show, and yeah,
that's great. So welcome to Wide Flake New Cool. Now I know what you, the listener, not Alon. This is me talking to you now, listener. I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? Let me explain. New Cool is a new and cool wide flank show where once a month, Alon and I will be bringing something new and cool to the table to share with each other. We're thinking about it in terms of layers. Alon, could you please outline your layers?
Yeah, so we wanted to keep it loosely related to games, not strictly video games, not strictly games, but this is how I was thinking of it. Layer 1 is video games. Anything obviously related to video games is on brand. That's part of the wide flank world. Layer 2 is just gaming. Any sort of game, very related, on brand.
And I didn't want to get lost in the weeds of it because you hear some talk from people who are from Nevada that gaming refers to gambling and stuff like that. We've moved past that as a culture, right?
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about.
The year is 2024.
Layer 3 is the very notion of play itself.
Ooh.
Any sort of play. It could be animals. It could be the playground. It could be anything. It could be petting a pet. And then layer 4, the deepest layer that will go. I just have written down in the notes, computers. The example that made me go there was, I was like, a kind of interesting topic would be like copy and paste, just like those functions.
And straight up, as soon as Alon brought up copy and paste, it was like, oh yeah, there's some meat on this bone.
Yeah, like this like core computing concept.
A little bit of history, a little bit of lived experience of copy and paste.
So that's layer 4. That's the furthest we'll stray, I think, from just like talking about video games.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Cool.
If it didn't, so just to bring it back down to earth a little bit, we went pretty high in the stratosphere with those layers. To bring it back down to earth a little bit, I just want to say this one's a garden for gamers. And gamers, you might be saying, when you hear some of the topics we talk about, you might be saying, that ain't new. It's new to us. You might be saying, that ain't cool. It's cool to us. The end of intro. So, Alon, this month you're going first. What you got for us?
So, some people may or may not know that I'm a world famous fantasy sports podcaster, and my topic is fantasy sports.
Oh,
it's, to me, a misunderstood genre of games, and it's also something that over time, since like the 50s-ish or even earlier to now, has like drastically changed. And like within it has like lots of different subgenres of games. So sort of my like Wikipedia style definition of what fantasy sports is like nowadays, you create a team of real athletes and you score points based on their actual performances in their games, in their sport, competing against other people's teams to see who gets more points. And like my dumbed down version of that is like, if a good thing happens in the real life sport, then that's good for your fantasy team. And if a bad thing happens in the real life sport, it's bad for your fantasy team. Does that sort of fit with like what your definition of fantasy sports was?
I mean, before we move on to what I think of, I'll just answer your question. Yeah. And you called it dumbed down, but I actually kind of like the way that you phrased that of like, just, like it's elegant in its simplicity.
Yeah, I just want to, it's like maybe dumbed down's wrong. It's just the layman's version. Like anyone can understand that like the ball went in the basket and that's good for the basketball team. And yeah.
So the complications I think come in when it starts to be like, wait, who do I choose and how? And like, how do I follow their performance? And like, where do those metrics come from? Because I got roped into a few different fantasy leagues over the years. And the first time I tried to play along. I tried to keep up, but I did not watch a game ever. I got entangled in a web of, because people knew I wasn't really paying attention. They would like make trades with me that would like mess up the game for everyone else.
It's a competitive game. Yeah.
And then people would get mad at me, and it was just like, I didn't. And then
it's very, that's very like on brand. And I think that's what pushes a lot of people away from fantasy sports or just sports in general, is that kind of like, it's very like corporate feeling and competitive feeling and cutthroat. And like, if you don't know, like, you're an idiot and you shouldn't be in my league and you don't know anything, you know, and there's a lot of that in fantasy sports because it is a competitive game. You're always competing against other people's teams.
Cool. That sounds nice.
Well, also, I think just the word fantasy, I wanted to just touch on that really quickly because a lot of people that I end up having to explain fantasy sports to think it has something to do with like D&D or something because of the word fantasy.
Really?
Like they think it has nothing to do with real life. And I'm like, interesting.
I was gonna say,
like,
that's fun to think about.
Yeah, like actual D&D for sports would be really interesting. Like you'd have to literally make a team and make a game and roll for everything, and like, you know, it'd be so different.
I was going to explode that out a little bit into like what would D&D for sports be? Yeah,
like just a sports league that's D&D or something.
So you're just making choices. This is blowing this segment out this is blowing it up a little bit too big.
Yes and no. Because basically, going back in time a little bit, the history of what is considered the precursor to current fantasy sports are all these tabletop games. And they're mostly baseball games.
Okay.
And they're almost all dice rolling games. And it's 6-sided die and it's 20-sided die. And you roll a 7 and then you look on your hitter's chart of what does a 7 mean? It means he hits a ground ball. And then your other dice is a 18. And what does an 18 mean? It means like the ground ball goes to this fielder. And then you have to roll and see like how good is this fielder? And it's like, did he make an out or was it a double? Like that's the early days of like parlor baseball.
I was going to pop off because it's like, one, that sounds really fun and interesting.
It's cool.
And also, that sounds like it's equipped especially well to baseball, which I tend to think of as,
yes,
I'm not the biggest sports guy in the world. Alon loves the sports.
Yes.
Somehow we make it work.
Yes.
But I know what baseball is, and my understanding of baseball is that like it's a stepwise sport more than a basketball, which is like moment choices.
Exactly.
Baseball is like, there goes the pop fly, and he's run to first base. Like it's and so like
baseball is a turn-based sport.
Sure.
Which is not the case like what you said, like hockey or basketball or soccer. Football, American football is also turn-based, and also a lot of these early games there were football versions of them. But baseball is also interesting. I mean, I don't want this to turn into a baseball episode, but in general, like it's the least team sport of all the team sports. Like, right, you go up to bat, it's like a one-on-one. You're batting against the pitcher. There's no like team, like you're not getting like a pass from your teammate or like, you know what I mean? There's nothing. It's just one-on-one. So it lends itself well to like, I roll a dice and see what happens in this one-to-one interaction. And then based on that, it affects like the base runners, right? So those parlor games then went to like sort of coin-operated baseball sims, which were sort of like pinball. You would like put a coin in and you would like pull this bat down and these 3 steel balls representing your 3 outs in baseball, and you would like launch the ball, and whatever hole it went in was either like a hit, like a single, a double, a triple, a home run, an out, or a sacrifice. And you would like move your little pegs across the top of the thing.
What's a sacrifice in this context?
Sacrifice in baseball is sacrificing yourself so that your teammate who's on base can move up, advance to another base. Sacrificing myself meaning I'm going to basically intentionally get out in a manner which lets my teammate advance. Bunt is the most common way to do that. if you know what that is.
It's when you hold the bat and you just bonk it.
Yeah, and you basically like very softly dead the ball in front of you. And your teammate will run from first to second, which is the furthest place away, second base from home plate.
Oh.
And so the easy out is just to throw you out at first base and your teammate advances to second. That's like classic sacrifice. Yeah.
That's okay. I don't know where to begin with that because that's wild.
Yeah.
Because I've not once in my, because I played baseball as a child, but my experience of playing baseball, much like my experience of fantasy sports, was like I hit the ball and then would just like watch it go, and then everyone would yell at me to run.
Yeah.
And I couldn't.
And you ran.
And I ran.
Anyway, this isn't a baseball episode.
This isn't a baseball. But wait, no. I had a question. I had a designy question, which is who is the one making the choice to do the sacrifice? Is that like a coach choice or an individual player choice?
Usually the coach. Yeah, usually the manager would send a signal, some sort of hand signal to the batter, and then the batter will sacrifice them.
Sure.
And there's also a first base coach in baseball.
Okay.
So in this example, the first base coach will let the base runner know your teammate's gonna sacrifice, so you have to sprint to second base.
Again with hand codes?
Yeah.
It's all in hand codes?
Yeah, that's just the traditional way they do it.
This isn't a baseball podcast.
It's not, but like it's so related intrinsically to fantasy sports, and all these early things are basically all baseball. So just advancing through history again, there's a game called Stratomatic that I've played. It's great. It's existed since the 60s, and it still exists. And it's a dice rolling game similar to all those simulation games I mentioned before. But the big difference is that you get real players on the cards, right? So like you could have, a Mickey Mantle card, and his dice roll outcomes will be better than a random player's dice roll outcomes because it's based off of Mickey Mantle's stats, if that makes sense, right? So he gets a hit this % of the time, and Joe Schmo gets a hit much less % of time. So more of Joe Schmo's numbers will be out, and more of Mickey Mantle's numbers will be hit.
And is that the start of like that sort of databasing? Like, was databasing happening in sport before this, or was this sort of motivated by these types of games?
In baseball, it was, and I think that's where the game probably came from. You could, back in the day, even you could look in the newspaper and you would see, and it wasn't just like the score. You could see like Babe Ruth went 1 for 4 with a home run, and you could like track their stats. But this was the first time that sort of like a game was based off of a player's statistics, if that makes sense. So it's like you can see how it's the beginning of fantasy because it's sort of based off last season sports, whereas modern day fantasy is forecasting their future stats.
Sure.
But it's related, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and so now there's much more unknown because you're making picks on things that haven't happened yet. Whereas back then, you kind of know, Mickey Mantle's better, and so if I use him and roll, I'll do better. He'll get more hits on average.
Because it's you're dealing with like hard numbers or like there's still chance baked into all of this.
Oh yeah, big time. You're still rolling a dice.
But in what I'm getting from what you're saying is that modern fantasy games are far more like the unknowns are a little more complicated because it's literally like, we'll see how this game goes.
Yeah,
we'll see how Brett Favre does this time.
There you go. Yeah, the sports.
I know Brett Favre.
But so this kind of, to me, when I was like thinking about what topic I should do, this is where I thought that it maybe got the most interesting because in the 80s is when fantasy baseball that is much more related to the modern game begins. And basically what I mean when I say that is when it turns into a game of real life stats and how that affects your team as opposed to rolling dice or something like that based off of past stats. And what's interesting from a game perspective is you're now the manager of a team in a way, and you're not the player anymore. You're not rolling dice. Does that make sense?
Like the status of the person playing the modern fantasy game as opposed to someone playing the progenitor of the fantasy game.
So like all of a sudden you even though rolling dice is supposed to be random, it feels like you're in control, right? Like it feels like a skill game probably when you're a kid rolling dice. Whereas now I'm not rolling any dice at all. It's based on what happens in real life. I'm just assembling a group of athletes, and whatever happens in real life is how well my team does.
The ultimate dice roll is in the mind.
Yes. So this split is where I was kind of like focusing some of my research and energy, and what I thought might be interesting to talk about is like, so the early days that I just mentioned, you're the player, you're the one rolling the dice. It gives you this illusion of control that like you're skillful and that's why you won. The modern most popular way to like play a sports game would be video games, right? Like playing Madden, playing FIFA, playing NBA 2K. You're the player. You're in control.
Totally.
You do the moves. You're simulating being a professional athlete.
Sure.
Some video games, you're not the player, you're the owner. Like the really popular one is called Football Manager, which describes itself as a football management simulation video game.
Simulation, yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
Which is honestly more similar to like Roller Coaster Tycoon than it is to FIFA, probably. Like you just build a team and like you don't play the soccer match, but you sign the players and like control the strategy that they're going to implement.
There was a comic recently shared in the Wide Flink Discord. A little bit of a plug there for you. There was a comic recently shared in the Wide Flink Discord that like talked about games as either being parkour games or menu games.
Yes.
And I think that has that has bearing upon what we're talking about, because the way that you're describing, what's the name of the
Football Manager.
Football Manager, that's a menu game, not
very
a parkour
hardcore
game.
Menu game. Yeah. So these other menu video games, I mentioned Roller Coaster Tycoon. I instantly thought of Drug Wars on the TI-83 calculators.
Good lord.
Did you ever play that game? Like in high school or something?
I did. It was completely text-based, right?
Completely text-based. And like you have a goal, which maybe you remember better than me. I think you have a goal in Roller Coaster Tycoon too, to just like make more money.
Oh, there's numbers. There's numbers in Roller Coaster Tycoon.
But there's no like end game, right? You kind of just are in this universe running this amusement park.
How much do you want to know?
Okay, well, I want to know. Is there a final boss?
No, I don't know if there's an end game. I just know there's
Gandalf comes to ride every coaster until it's or not.
Wait, one more time. Get that line out clear.
No, just saying Gandalf comes to the amusement park, has to ride every ride, see if it's sick or not.
I was hoping that's what you said, because that's like exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Like, he's the one that decides. Like, pretty good coaster.
Anywho, so I think I haven't played Football Manager. It doesn't really interest me that much, but
do you play FIFA?
Yeah, sometimes. Not that much. Okay. But I'm pretty sure in Football Manager, there's not like really winning or losing. You're just like a person in this simulated world. Whoa. Like, yeah, you might get fired from Manchester United, but you'll get another job and you'll try and like do well. It's like about doing well in your job.
You can't get blacklisted from the industry.
Right. So this is exactly. And so this is, you're an owner. You're not a player. It's a menu game. And the other offshoot of all of these, these four branches is fantasy sports, the modern game, where you're an owner. You assemble a team composed of proxies of real players of a real sport, and based on what they do in real life is you getting points. So I think that like it's just an interesting place where everything started, and then all these like divergence of what a sports game might be.
It's the nexus. It's the Lexus nexus of all. Well, because it's without getting real big brain about this. I think I'm glad you led with this topic, about to navigate my own struggles of struggles. Struggles is a big word for what I'm about to describe. My struggles, navigating the difference between the difference and similarities between sports and video games and play and what are rules within a game and because sports are such codified cultural things in a way that video games are also like fairly codified at this point, but it's like I'm not even sure what I'm getting at. It's just like I've tried to relinquish my own like that there's hard distinctions between these things.
Right. And yeah, we meaning you and me and our friends play sports video games all the time, and they're really, really fun and sick. And I'm pretty sure of our group that I'm talking about, I'm the only one who even watches sports.
Right. Yeah.
Josh does too, I guess. But yeah, like,
not to get too outside the reality of the pod, but literally the last time I tried to have this conversation with somebody was with Josh, because I thought he was going to be primed to have it. He was just like, yeah, sports or games. Like, it was just like pretty just like clean cut, and I was like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it just interested me to think about. It's something that I spend so many hours every week think about my team, recording podcasts about the players and the games, and obviously it's enhanced because I like watching soccer, and it's enhanced because I care about the results and that kind of stuff. But honestly, you don't have to like sports to play fantasy sports. You don't have to watch sports, certainly, to play fantasy sports. I mean, you could literally just pick guys who got points and not watch a single game all year.
Sure.
And at this point, it's just spiral like that. It's like basically, that's why I called it a misunderstood genre, because I think just fantasy games is like its own specific menu type of game where there's fantasy The Bachelor now. There's fantasy wrestling, which is a scripted soap opera, basically.
Sure.
There's fantasy esports. Like, it's not just sports. And I think, literally hundreds of millions of people play fantasy sports around the world. And I don't think it has to be this thing where it's like, I don't like sports, like, get out of my face, because it's such an interesting game that, like, you're basing things that happen in reality to your team, and you can like assemble a team and then go watch them play. Like, even that concept is like crazy. It's like, imagine like anything, a war game, and then you're like, oh, let's go see how the war's going. It's like,
Jesus.
What the hell? Like, that's so psycho. But like, sports are that, weirdly. I just think it's interesting and underrated.
It sounds like, you love the mechanism of it, and the way that like it interacts, the way that the game interacts with reality is kind of not shocking. I wouldn't call that shocking, but like there's something unique.
It's very unique because it's not LARPing and it's not an ARG. It's distinctly different than those games, those styles, right? But is it?
So if we were to make like a fantasy, I can't sell this bit. I can't sell.
No
I was
problem.
going to try to say who would be on your fellowship. There's
Not
something.
going there.
I don't know.
I just wanted to also, I forgot to say this earlier, but
Please.
When I was first getting into fantasy sports, I think I was around 12, like around 6th grade.
Whoa.
Watching NFL games at my parents' house with friends. And they like 4 or 5 friends would come over, and we were kind of like, and our big joke at the time was like, if someone brought over a sick snack, we'd be like, oh, like, plus 500 fantasy Alon's house. Or if someone like spilled a drink, we'd be like, oh, minus 300 points fantasy Alon's house. Like, we weren't actually keeping track.
But the notion, fantasy
the notion
Alon's house.
of anything could be a fantasy sport in real life is
my
just like,
God.
That's kind of the connection that is sick. You know what I mean?
So good. That's incredibly good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if it's in the game, it's in the game. And I think people should try.
Run through those notes now.
I'm running through the 6 with my woes.
Just no context. If it's in the game, it's in the game.
You heard of that? Any questions or anything, or should we jump over to what your topic this week?
Month? I could cook up some questions, but
I feel like we covered most of it, right?
I think we already hit the beautiful button of fantasy Alon's house. Like, that concept is the greatest shit in the world.
It's
like,
so good.
It's like hard to pin down what's so great about it, but it's very good. And also, it very quickly, this has nothing to do with anything, but it very quickly brought me back to just like sleepovers and like, oh yeah, like what little games did we come up with?
Just like dumb little games that actually weirdly explain what a fantasy sport actually is, right? It's an event that happens in real life that you're just like applying points to.
Sure.
Like you could literally do you can fantasy planes landing at JFK. And I'm like, we draft different planes. And, you know what I mean? Like literally anything. And I think that like medium and genre is just, and that connection to reality is just cool.
It's a play layer applied to reality.
Yes.
Bada bing.
Bada bing, bada boom. What do you got for us?
Thank you. Okay. As Alon's talking through all this stuff, I'm like, my topic's a little bit different.
I love that.
Alon's talking about the numbers. He's getting into the nitty gritty of the design. And I'm realizing my segments, it's going to be a little more about the aesthetics. Because I have not even played the video game I'm about to talk about.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that game is, which again, not every episode of this show is going to be like listing games. Like it's going to be topic oriented. But this week I've got a game. And that game is called Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver.
Okay. Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Answered my question. So just let that soak in from it. The Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Okay. Where does the mind go, Alon? Where does your mind go when you hear the phrase?
It's funny to go from fantasy sports to that because this just sounds like pure hard fantasy to me.
Oh baby, is it ever?
Yeah. So that's all I got for you. I don't know anything about it. Tell me more.
So just some basic upfront intro. It's a video game. It was developed by Crystal Dynamics, published by Eidos Interactive, and most importantly of all, it was directed by one Amy Hennig. Okay. And Amy Hennig, so my topic is twofold. One, it's Soul Reaver. It's Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. And then at the head of this project is a woman named Amy Hennig. So it was a video game released in August of 1999, initially for the Sony PlayStation, and then a month later for the personal computer. And then January of the next year, the year 2000, for the Sega Dreamcast. It's a game that's between consoles, and indeed a game that's between worlds. And without getting too into it, because truly, I don't know the game design of this game especially well.
I'm on the edge of my seat wondering, why is this a topic? But keep going.
Why is it a topic? It's called The Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver.
Go on.
I just want to think about that. I just want everyone to think about that for a moment. But I make a joke about it being a game between worlds. It's kind of a cheap joke because it's like literally part of the game mechanism is that you play this, I'll tell you what you play, but you play a creature of some sort who like moves between different realms. And there's all these like technicals about how they achieved that and how it was a legendary achievement at the time. Yada, yada.
Yada, yada.
But the point is the actual point is I do not know about the game design as such. Like I'm taking a perspective at this game, which is like, it's less about like how much can I glean from a game from afar, and it's more about like what is like how do we become curious about a thing in the first place?
Yeah.
And so for me, it just started with just the title. I just found myself sick as a dog under the auspices of COVID.
Yeah.
I had COVID brain. My dreams were so vivid for so many days. And at some point in the COVID brain, I just kept thinking Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. And it brought me so much joy, just that phrase. And then I watched some video. Anyway, point is, I don't know the game design as such. I've heard rumors that it's a Zelda-like game.
Okay.
Which is literally how Amy Hennig refers to it. There, in an interview with her, she goes on to say it was conceived as an open world Zelda-esque 3D adventure game. Literally that was what was informing their choices.
Interesting. It came out right then too, because I don't know how long they worked on it, but like it's overlapping with like Ocarina Majora's right at that same time, basically.
They began development of the game in 1997.
Right. So it's pre-Ocarina even coming out is when they're,
It's pre the release of Ocarina, but I'll do some like nerd diving into my brain to say that the game that preceded this game, The Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen, that game was a game for the PlayStation 1 as well. That was far more in the mold of a traditional top-down Zelda game.
Okay.
So it was, so even like the lineage of this game series is already like informed by Zelda. So like,
and they're just kind of like embracing 3D games at the same time more than like, they're taking from Ocarina or something.
I think it's like they're because Ocarina is, and look, Wide Flank isn't supposed to be the Zelda podcast.
It ain't.
It sure ain't. Alon's done.
I'm done with Zelda, but I just did 20 minutes on fantasy sports, so I'm rejuvenated.
Oh, beautiful. That's all it takes, folks. But yeah, I think it's you already put it quite succinctly, which is like they're already thinking about Zelda design and rendering it in 3D, which was indeed like, that's how Ocarina of Time functions as well as like a broader structure. It's like some of the design choices of A Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo rendered in 3D.
Yeah.
So that's how, Amy herself literally like referred to it as a Zelda inspired game. And I want to also list some of Amy's credits, which are producer, designer, writer, director. Like she is very clearly the author of this project.
Okay.
The lore master, if you will.
Her previous works are pretty interesting too.
What are some of her previous works?
Artist on 3D baseball, which like the cover looks so sick and I'm pumped. And also designer, artist on Michael Jordan, Chaos in the Windy City.
Dude.
A 1994 Super Nintendo game.
Do you know what that game is?
Side-scrolling platformer of Michael Jordan.
And you throw basketballs as like your attack.
It's so amazing. Like, oh man, there were so many platformers that were just like celebrity.
Yeah.
Like there's that Michael Jackson game.
Dude.
There's infinite.
It's the era of the mascot platformer.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful time for studios and publishers alike. Because I think like with those, and I'm zooming in, I think like with those types of projects, it was like kind of a sure bet of a project for a studio to like develop out from kind of. And to that point, like Amy clearly, not going to tell any tales outside of school, but like clearly Amy's interest is in developing IP and like that's kind of a crass way to put it, but it is in developing her own stories. I mentioned IP specifically because I wanted to also flag that part of this game's development, as much as we're talking about the Legacy of Kain, it was initially developed as an original story by Amy and her team. It was initially developed as a game called Shifter. So just like focusing on like what Shifter was initially developed as, the very specific aesthetic and game design ideas that were present in the pitch for Shifter carried through into this ultimate project. And I'm going to read some of them, and this is from Amy. Without knowing this game, some of this might not land, but just imagine a blue man in a brown cloak.
Okay, I could do that.
The hero was an undead creature, able to shift between the spectral material realms and glide on the tattered... And this is Amy talking about the pitch for a different game that was outside the context of this existing franchise. Able to shift between the spectral material realms and glide on the tattered remains of his wing-like coattails, we conceive the spirit realm as a twisted, expressionistic version of the physical world. The hero was bent on revenge after being betrayed and cast down by his creator. He was a dark savior figure, chosen to restore balance to a blighted dystopian world. The point being that it's like those are narrative choices that would like continue on into this final product, essentially. It's as much as this game started out as like an original thing from this woman and from her team, it like was molded into something else that from what I've read from Amy, it's like she is proud of it and proud of where it sits in her career.
So it sort of sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, your interest in the game is almost more like Amy driven because you haven't played it. Like it's almost more Amy and development driven than it is like, I just really want to play this game and I'm psyched about this game. Because if that was the case, you would have played it already, probably.
I want to play it.
Yeah.
I want to play all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
but, I don't know, because we could get into a conversation about like the desire to engage with a work compared with like actually engaging with the work and like how do you allot the brain space for that? But truly, for me, the process was just Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver sound funny. Like it started that, but then like very quickly I was like, no, this was a serious project. People worked on this, and like this is actually like the type of story that someone wanted to tell. And I tried to pull some quotes of like Amy having fun with talking about the game, and all I could really find was her saying like, yes, there are some larger than life aspects of the storytelling, almost Shakespearean. Okay. Like,
sure. Heard of them.
Heard him. So there's a lot of lore in the game. There's a lot of style. And here's an idea I also want to flag. And whether it's your style or not, hell, that's up to you, gamers. Like, it's so clearly an individual vision. Like I haven't really even filled out what this game is as such. It's like,
what is it? I still don't really know. Other than it's sort of a Zelda-like and it's fantasy. It sounds very hard fantasy.
It's hard fantasy, and it's also like twisted dark 1999.
Okay,
like it's not that far off from like Blade and The Matrix.
Okay, sick. Okay,
yeah. Like it's got this just like, hey, what's up? I already made my joke on one of our Majora episodes about the fierce deity. You don't need to listen to every episode of Wide Flick, but I made a joke in that episode of like, hey, what's up? Fuck you. Whatever. It's like Cool Boy in the Mall circa 1999.
Sounds sick.
Hey. Right? Yeah. And so I'm going to fill this out a little bit with a selection of lore from the instruction booklet itself. Before I go into that, what do you think of Soul Reaver? Would you want to play Soul Reaver based on what I've said?
Based on it being a Zelda-like, I would say no. But then based on how you just described the aesthetics, I'm like, that sounds cool. You know, I'm not a big fantasy guy, even though I just talked about fantasy sports. That's where the fucking disconnect comes in between that word and me. But I mean, it sounds kind of badass and sounds kind of cool. And I like this era of games and this era of style. Also, like the composer of the game is like this like synth pop guy. He was in like synth pop bands and stuff like that, and so some people might know some of the songs. It seems like they're kind of had a hit single in the 80s and all this kind of stuff, and then he just got into composing for video games, and I'm like, I'm kind of down.
So this person's name is Kurt Harland, and that's its own, like, that could be its own focal point of like a future new cool, you know? Like, we could dive deep on Kurt, because like it is fascinating, like just like the paths that creative careers go down.
So interesting,
like getting that, and I think that like it speaks to Amy's professional career too, of like navigating from those licensed games to things that are like fully, I don't know if she owned the IP outright or like what the gosh darn organizational structure is. Like I don't know the business dealings of Crystal Dynamics.
It sounds like a Ponzi scheme kind of company.
It's not real.
Trust me, Crystal Dynamics.
Put
all your money in Crystal Dynamics.
Crystal Dynamics.
Yeah, exactly.
They've had honestly like a pretty sordid corporate history. It doesn't matter. They've been acquired, and it doesn't matter.
What are you going to read to us? That's what I'm curious. Where are you focusing your energy, and what are we diving into right here?
You're holding in your hand the Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. You open the instruction booklet. You turn a few pages. You see in big letters at the top of the page, Redemption. You see in slightly smaller letters above some text, Dark Gods.
Wow. Hardcore.
Let's fucking go.
Yeah, it's hardcore.
A millennium has passed since Lord Kain set his capital in the ruins of the Pillars of Nosgoth and began his conquest of the world. His first act was to recruit a cadre. Dipping into the underworld, Kain snared 6 souls and thus birthed his lieutenants, of which I, Raziel, was one. We, in turn, prowled the twilight of purgatory, building 6 legions of vampires to pillage Nosgoth.
What's happening?
Yeah, you want to check in? How you feeling?
I'm scared. I don't know what the hell's happening.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
read stuff
It's-
like this. I don't read fantasy. It just
It's-
like I'm just like, what the hell?
We're in a twisted realm of darkness
Yeah.
called Nosgoth. The destruction of the major human kingdoms was inevitable. Within 100 years, humanity had been thoroughly domesticated. To be sure, there remained some feral humans scattered across the hinterlands, clinging to their hopeless holy war to rid Nosgoth of the vampire scourge. They were tolerated. They made existence for the fledglings more challenging. Just to zoom out a bit, I love how much this is fucking selling. Just like, I'm telling you about my vampire world.
Yeah, there's a little bit of ChatGPT in there.
Well,
with
sorry.
The amount of like classic words. Like the word inevitable, I hate that word. Like
No?
every text and lore has the word inevitable when they don't want to like finish the rest of the sentence. The
For sure.
destruction of the human race was inevitable. It's like, what?
So it happened.
Yeah.
Before the video game, it happened.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like, because I'm not going to read all of this because it goes on. And as we get further
That's
into
scary.
the text, it gets more like game designy. Like,
I mean, I'm just pumped because I just finished the anime Berserk.
yeah,
And the guy who voiced, how do you say his name? Raziel? The main character in Soul Reaver?
Raziel.
He also voiced
Raziel.
Guts in Berserk, which came out in the
Oh,
Berserk
shoot.
game. In the game of Berserk that came out in 99 also.
Beautiful.
So my dude's working.
So it's, I mean, God, what's that person's name?
My dude is Michael Bell.
God bless Michael Bell.
Born in Brooklyn.
Born in Brooklyn? Hell
My
yeah.
guy.
What a Mike.
He's acted in video games and animated series including Legacy of Kain, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Houndcats, Rugrats, Smurfs, Incredible Hulk,
Houndcats, Rugrats.
Smurfs, Incredible Hulk, Snorks. This dude's serious.
He's working. God bless. Is
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Anyway, we've got all these and I think it's important to keep like flagging even these people in these not smaller roles, but these like less celebrated. Because even Amy, I've tried to take
cool.
great care to say it's like Amy and her team. Because I think there's like, as much as we embark upon this like new vision of Wide Flank trying to center like the people who work on games in part. Would you agree? I just said a lot of information about the
I think so.
goals of the podcast. There still, I think, is a big tendency to just to talk with any sort of collaborative art making to try and talk about like who was the person that made it.
Yeah, the one person that single-handedly made everything, which is literally never the case.
Never.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. You got to have special thanks on the first page. Even if you're
Right.
like making a solo comic book, it's like,
Yeah.
my
Couldn't have done it
girlfriend read
without
it.
these 20 people that
Yeah.
helped me. Yeah. In my life, even if it's not directly, they didn't draw the panels, but they helped you in other ways.
They had helpful conversations.
Yeah.
Smash cut 2. After the taming of the humans, our real work began, shaping Nosgoth to our will. Around the pillars, slaves, don't love that, but around the pillars, slaves constructed a shrine worthy of our new age, worthy of our dark renaissance. Huge furnaces were built to belch smoke into the sky, shielding the land from the poisonous effects of the sun. Oh, because they're vampires.
Oh, wait, the main character is a vampire or the bad guys are vampires?
It's all vampires.
It's all
I'm
vampy.
pretty sure it's all vampires.
I like vampire shit. I'm a big Buffy Angel guy.
Yeah? I'm a big
Yeah.
Dracula fan myself.
Right. You mentioned Dracula, I think, on the...
Have I?
Yeah, I think on the... I don't remember when, but I remember hearing you say, like, have you read Dracula? Oh,
Epistolary. Epistolary. This is the
Yeah.
Oberdone.
Oberdin GLHF episode. Yeah.
Stay tuned for Game Club Oberdone.
Yeah. Oberdin.
What?
DINN.
Huh? So that's a bunch of the lore of the game, and like truly, like what has compelled me to this game, like a desire to play with it or engage with it, is like aesthetic level things. So as much as like my COVID brain was like Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, and like just having fun with thinking about that, I went back into my mind palace of my child mind and could like vividly remember seeing the key art for this game, and deep in my soul Reaver, deep in my soul, River, deep. I'll stop. Deep in my soul, there was a gut feeling of like, this is freaking badass. This is so cool. Because I was like a child in 1999, and seeing, and we'll link to some iconography of this game, or you can type it into your phone to see what it looks like. But it's like this very glossy. It's like glossy and grimy because it's from 1999. And it's this like kind of sexy. He's got like cool guy bangs and like a tattered cloak and blue skin. Like it's coded as hot. He's coded as hot. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong, but it's so PlayStation looking. Like it's so like,
dude.
Like it's just funny when you look back at these games and you just see this vampire dude and everything's just empty behind him. It's just like the flattest like textures on the walls and stuff, and you're just like, it's just fucking gnarly to look back at these graphics. Yeah,
and the character is like hyper detail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't want to get too off task, but apparently Raziel is actually like a figure in Jewish mysticism.
Oh, didn't see that coming. Okay,
didn't see that coming. So it was a game that I like was attracted to as a child. It entered my mind in a more or less arbitrary way a few days ago. I played the game once as an adult, like to actually try to engage with it, but like put it down. It was just like I just bounced off of it a little bit.
Yeah.
But like what of talking about it as like a game itself, I think like there's an interesting notion in this story a little bit of like how do you back adapt a project into an existing franchise? Like that's something to think about. And I think we already hit the nail on the head a few times in terms of like what is it to be like an individual creator working within this system and like trying to like get your ideas heard or seen or formed. And I'm going to continue down that earnest path. There's a funny path too, but I'm setting aside the funny path for the earnest path, which is like my understanding from like my brief engagement with reading about Amy Hennig and thinking about this game is that like the narrative content of this game, by virtue of its clear authorship attached to Amy Hennig, is a foundational text of modern video game storytelling in a way. That was a doozy of a sentence. But
that was hard. Go open it up.
The choices that Amy made as a storyteller on this game and like would continue to make as she worked on further games, like have defined like video game. And I wasn't looking for this conclusion necessarily. It just sort of like came to me because Amy would go on to be a crucial figure in the development of Naughty Dog's Uncharted games, which like I don't know those games too well.
I haven't played them, but they're really mega successful and famous, and they're
big games,
big AAA games,
and it's for better or for worse. Those games have sort of like set something of a rubric of like just like what are the standards of games, because those are character driven games,
right?
They're like narrative driven games, like. Often enough people are critical of how the game balances its narrative and its design one way or the other. But like the sheer fact of the reality is that like the through line of this person's career follows the through line of narrative development in games. Because Amy wasn't involved with Last of Us at all. But there is like a pretty clear lineage of storytelling ambition from Legacy of Kain to Uncharted to Last of Us, which brings us to Pedro Pascal. So it's like there is this sort of like, and I say that thing as a joke, but it's all the Pedro Pascal thing as a joke, but it's also like that's the reality of where this woman's creative ambition has gone. Like it's like reached out of the medium into telling these types of stories to a broader audience. And to like stick the old landing for my own benefit of like I might have come at this game being like, haha, Nosgoth. So stupid sounding. It's like, yeah, you know what else is stupid? Like everything that everyone likes ever. Like for one, like it's audiences have readily adapted to like Game of Thrones and Last of Us and Fallout and like all these like highfalutin, goofier sorts of stories are ordinary now. And like, I think that's a beautiful thing. I think is my most generous conclusion about that. So yeah, my point of curiosity is twofold. It's Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver is funny and badass.
And also funny because it's badass.
Yeah, there's a virtuous cycle there.
Yeah.
And Amy Hennig is a very important figure in the video game industry. Yeah. An important voice.
It's interesting because, and there's no details, there's probably some story there, but she left Naughty Dog in 2014.
Sure.
And Last of Us came out in 2013.
Oh.
And she was creative director at Naughty Dog, but there's no hint of her working on it or contributing in any way.
Sure.
It seems like she was just all on the Uncharted stuff, which is interesting and weird.
Sure. We could dive deep. I mean, and that's part of the goal of this show, I think, too, is like planting little seeds of curiosity that you can then like go down. Do your own research.
She's like sort of considered a legend. I mean, she's like won all these writing awards and all kinds of stuff. She's just kind of like OG legend of, you know, a successful woman in a male-dominated industry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you for saying the quiet part out loud, because it's like that's because I didn't feel guilty, but like very quickly I was just like, Soul of Reaver Legacy of Kain isn't just funny. Yeah. Like it's not just it's funny. It is funny. It is. You know? It is larger than life. It's about vampires.
But then you Google the art for Electro Cop on Atari and know that Amy did the art for that, and you're like, this is fucking sick. And I want to play this game. And Amy is fucking sick.
Holy shit. Wait, did she do like the cover art or the graphical art?
The art. She's just artist on Electro Cop.
Holy shit.
That was like her first job in gaming.
Whoa.
Her first job was a freelance artist for Electro Cop, an unreleased Atari 7800 game based on the Atari Lynx launch title. Afterwards, she joined EA as an animator and artist, doing work on unreleased title Bard's Tale 4 and Desert Strike. She later moved to designing and directing games.
Sure. So she had a lot of experience with like that very game industry sort of like unreleased projects as a thing that like is regular.
Yeah. She's been in it for a really long time. She's been in the gaming industry.
And now she's working on like wild licenses. Like she's returned
Star
to
Wars,
license.
right?
It's like there was like some Star Wars project of hers that I think was like a high profile cancellation, or is it is it still? I know that there's like a Marvel project that's in like ongoing development right now.
Hate to hear that.
Why is that?
We're not getting into that.
No.
I don't like that stuff.
No, the Star Wars project is still going too.
Okay, nice.
Don't quote me on. Yeah, totally. I was thinking of something. There was some other project in 2014 that a Star Wars project was good.
Right.
A representative of EA told Polygon that EA are, quote, in discussions with Amy about her next move.
Okay,
this was back
interesting.
in, like, 2017.
Weird cryptic gamer news.
Yeah. But yeah.
Damn. So Sean talked about Amy Hennig and Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. I talked about fantasy sports. That's an episode.
If you want to talk with us about either of those topics, come on down to the Wide Flank Discord. Let's keep the conversation going down in the comments.
Keep the combo going, and we'll see you in a month with something else new and something else cool.